Welcome to the Essentially You podcast. Karen Martel, how are you doing today, girl?
I'm doing awesome. I'm happy to be here. I've been wanting to connect with you for, I feel like over a year now. So I'm so glad that we're finally able to do this.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's so good to have you on the show. I know we're talking about a topic that my audience is always trying to figure out, and that is weight loss resistance, right? The inability for us to lose weight no matter what we're doing, no matter what is going on, and then really trying to find the code that works for each of us. Especially as we get into our 30s, 40s, and beyond, this feels like it becomes ever the challenge. But
Mm-hmm.
before we get into all of this landscape of what is going on under the surface, I'd love for you, Karen, to talk a little bit about kind of what was that defining moment where you knew you wanted to help women get over weight loss resistance and really figure out what the right methodology it is for them to feel their best.
Mm-hmm. Well, mine started after the birth of my first child. I was 32 when she was born. And I gained a bunch of pregnancy weight, but it came off during, when I was breastfeeding. And so everything was okay. And then after I stopped breastfeeding, I went through this period of time where my body just continued to gain weight. And I've always been very health driven, but I was at a loss. I tried every diet you can think of. I was vegan, I went raw, I was detoxing, I was doing the Atkins diet. I tried everything and was working out harder than I'd ever worked out before. I had a personal trainer, I was doing boot camp, and I'm working out with all of these women doing the exact same thing that they were doing, and they were shredded. And I was like, why is this not happening to me? And I just kept gaining weight. And it was like all in my stomach. I was super bloated all the time. I would look like I was 3 months pregnant by the end of the day. I started developing skin rashes. I was getting really severe menstrual migraines, insomnia, like severe. I had to go on medication because I just suddenly could not sleep at all. And, I was going to my doctor. She, of course, had no idea. And nobody, being that I was so young, not one person said to me, could it be your hormones? And being the researcher that I always have been, I was just like, I have to figure this out. It's not my diet. It's not exercise, because I'm doing what everybody is telling me I should be doing and nothing's working. And so I ended up finding a naturopath who tested my hormones for me. And sure enough, they were an absolute disaster. And at the time, I would not have considered myself a stressed out person. But looking back, I think I really was, but I was just doing what every other woman in North America was doing. I was, raising my child, having my own business, like running around, never getting downtime, but that was normal, and exercising like crazy. Right. Well, my cortisol was rock bottom. My DHEA was rock bottom. My progesterone was rock bottom. My estrogen was too high. So I had all of these issues, and I was like, okay, now I have something to work with. And at the same time, I did find primal based eating, which really, I think, helped correct so much of the other stuff going on, the food sensitivities and the gut problems. I had to not just balance my hormones, but I had to look at the stress. I had to look at my past, which, I came from a history of many, many years, probably a decade of alcoholism and drug use. And even though I had been sober for probably 5 years at that time, I still think that a lot of what my hormones were showing me was due to the lifestyle that I used to live, of course, right? And I had to deal with a lot of emotional garbage. And so all of these things together had to be dealt with. And it wasn't a quick process. It wasn't a 30-day, hey, let's try this diet and everything's going to be okay. This was like a few years of putting all of this together and coming out, and my body finally releasing all of the weight and going, okay, there's so many women that are going through what I'm going through. And everybody looks at them like, well, you're not working out hard enough. Well, you're not eating perfect enough. You're not calorie counting. And I was like, that is the worst advice for somebody like myself and what I was going through. And I just went on a mission. I was like, that's it. I've got to help other women figure this out, because it's so much more than what we're eating and how much we're working out. And what I was doing to my body was actually the absolute worst. Like I quit exercising. I started doing yoga every day and meditating and doing complete opposite, eating different nourishing foods and never calorie counting, never carb counting again, and releasing the weight. So it's been quite a journey.
I can imagine. And it's very much the journey, like you said, that so many women are going through. And you're right, when you've got doctors and dietitians and, just people thinking it's calorie in versus calorie out, it just never is that simple, especially when it comes to women, especially when it comes to hormone fluctuations. And as I was listening to your story, Karen, I was like, oh yeah, that's estrogen dominance. Her progesterone's tanked. She's got cortisol is either in the can or it's elevated. Like she's stressed to the nine.
Yeah.
And so it's so funny because it's just not the way that the medical system looks at anything. It's not like they would have like gone through the list and said, oh, it's definitely hormonal imbalance that is driving this weight resistance.
Yeah.
Clearly all that stress. And, the worst thing that we can do is overexercise because it's
Yeah.
just a stressor.
Yeah.
And, your body's like, are you really going to hit me with more stress right now?
Yeah.
And yeah, it just becomes this like, this kind of like it's this tornado.
It was vicious. Yeah. Yeah. And then when I I had my second child, these dang children, lucky you're about to experience this. No, just kidding. When I had him, I was 37 and almost the exact same thing happened. But this time it was my progesterone just took a dive.
Mm-hmm.
DHEA was low, which I fixed those things. And then I went into my 40s with this like attitude that I'm super healthy. I've been eating this, primal based diet for 10 years. I exercise. I'm taking all the right supplements. I feel good. Like menopause is way off for me and I'm not going to have all these symptoms that other women are having. And lo and behold, at 42, I was going into menopause. I started losing my period. I was like, what? How is this happening to me? And it was crazy. I was hitting this crazy early perimenopause. And, looking at the research now, I think it was
I was like, Karen, that is not early.
Well, no, it's not. Well, it's early for most women. Most women, it's later in their 40s.
Women hit perimenopause in their late 30s, honestly.
Yes, yes.
And it's slight shifts and slight changes. Where I hear
late 30s for sure.
Yeah. When I hear women start to really feel it, usually 42, 43, 44 is when things start to shift. Like I said, it's again, these small shifts in every woman's a little bit different. And what I think having children later definitely can complicate things too.
Yeah, they take a toll on the hormones. Ideally we're supposed to have kids at like 16. So, it's not going to happen anymore. But yeah, it was crazy. And, and luckily I've been knowing what I know, I've been able to reverse that all. And I have a regular period now without any of those symptoms that I was having before. Huge changes were made and women don't realize what they can do in order to make these changes. And thanks to women like yourself and me, like we're trying to get the word out there, but there really isn't enough. We're a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, early signs of perimenopause in our early 40s is not necessarily just reproductive hormones. There's a lot of other underlying factors that are driving that earlier perimenopause. And like you said, especially in our early 40s, we can actually kind of get ourselves out of that a little bit and normalize things and kind of bring us back just a lot more ease and grace before we actually get to that definitive point of menopause, which is like usually 51, 52.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about, we do talk about weight loss resistance on the show because it is a problem for so many women and it's happening earlier than we would like. And again, we're not getting a lot of the answers that we're looking for. Talk to me about kind of your take around weight loss resistance. Like what's going on?
What's going on? Well, as we talked about, when we hit our late 30s is when women start to first notice it. And most women wouldn't say, oh, it's because I'm going through perimenopause.
No.
They wouldn't say, if they went to their doctor sure as heck wouldn't say that either. But in your late 30s is when you start to notice, I find that, oh, I've put on a few pounds around my stomach. What's going on? And then, you try and do the usual exercise and eat your way out of it, and it doesn't work. Mm-mm. And there's many factors going into it right now. And I'm really big on finding the diet that's going to work for you. And we're really bombarded so much right now by certain diets. And I was definitely a person that was jumping on every dietary train there was at a period of time, right? Like I said before, I've tried it all because I would hear about something or see that somebody was getting success with it and be like, oh, well, then this is what I'm going to get success on this too. You know, jumping on Atkins and going to boot camp was what these women were getting success with. Well, for me, it was absolutely horrible. And so I really try, and when women start to get to this stage in their life, this perimenopausal stage in their late 30s, early 40s, you need to start looking at it from this very holistic point of view. And there's certain things that are starting to happen. One of them being that progesterone, of course, starts to drop. And I know you probably talk a lot about this on your podcast, but just to remind everybody that yes, progesterone starts to drop first. And that can be a big issue when it comes to holding on to that weight. And then as we age, the estrogen starts to drop, which really is the cause of so much of the menopausal weight gain that we see, and especially around the stomach, is that estrogen dropping. The drop in estrogen increases your risk of developing type 2 diabetes. It increases your risk of insulin resistance. And there's things that we can do to help mitigate that, the effects of dropping estrogen. And so as you go into your 40s, up into your 50s, there's certain things that you can do and ways to eat to help with these certain hormonal imbalances that I found that really work. And right now we're seeing a lot of ketogenic, a lot of fasting, and that seems to be the diets that are pushed the most right now. It is the number one most Googled diet is keto, and intermittent fasting is second. That's pretty big. And so, you know, I've worked with primal-based diets for a long time. I myself have eaten paleo for over 10 years. I've been in and out of ketosis for 5 years. So I think that there's a lot of great things about that way of eating, because really it's bringing down your inflammation. It's making sure that your blood sugar stays steady. So there's all these great things to that way of eating. But what I'm seeing is that people are overdoing this ketogenic and fasting. And as we were just saying, like, you know, you said it right away. You're like, well, obviously her cortisol was messed up. Well, how many women do you come across that have messed up cortisol?
Everyone.
Everyone.
Every
Thank
single
you.
one of them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also insulin resistance already.
Yeah.
You know, and estrogen is an insulin protector, like you had mentioned. And when it tanks and we already have insulin resistance, because I'm under the impression that we start to develop insulin resistance in our 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And no one's flagging that either.
No.
And the tank in estrogen, it isn't doing our insulin levels any favors.
No, and people get really afraid of estrogen because estrogen dominance will also cause weight gain and inflammation, right? So we need this Goldilocks of estradiol in our system in order to help with that menopausal weight gain that's almost inevitable if you don't, you know, do stuff to help mitigate that. But what I'm seeing, so going back to every woman in North America right now has cortisol issues, you know, and either too high or too low. Both, once again, it needs to be Goldilocks. Well, here we are. We've got women that, let's say their cortisol's tanked, and then they go, you know, they follow what every other woman in their workplace is doing, which is ketogenic and fasting. And they're being told, don't eat more than 20 grams of carbohydrates in a day. Eat one meal a day, you know, the OMAD, they call it, one meal a day, which is the super, super popular. So you're just fasting all day and you eat one meal a day. Well, that's about 600 calories if you're lucky. If you eat a good sized meal, you can't really get too much out of one meal when you're eating one meal a day. So what is this doing to these women? And these are the women that I see in my practice every day that have heard me talk on other podcasts, and they come and say, I had a woman yesterday, she was 29 years old. She said, I've been doing keto carnivore and fasting for 2 years, but I haven't had my period for 1.5 years. And I said, well, what are you doing still doing it? And she's like, well, yeah, I want to have a baby. So now I want to change that. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And this is daily. I have women coming to me to say, oh, well, I lost a lot of weight in the beginning and That's the thing is these diets, intermittent fasting can be amazing. It can be anti-aging. It can help correct insulin resistance, which like you said, most of us are insulin resistant. It can be the biggest aha moment in somebody's life to start fasting and start to lose weight and get the benefits of this. And the ketogenic diet is the same thing. It's this amazing therapeutic tool that helps women to heal their gut, heal the insulin resistance, bring down inflammation very quickly. It's very satiating, so they don't feel like they're suffering. It's good food. And so it's like all great, but long term, it is ruining women's metabolisms because we know that fasting is really hard on your adrenals. And so here we have this society of overly stressed out women who are then fasting all day long and eating a low carb diet, and many of them with undiagnosed hypothyroidism. And that low carb, the stress, because fasting is a stress, is just putting fuel to the fire. And women are really wrecking their metabolisms when they overdo this. And so it's really about finding this balance between getting the benefits of a calorie restricted diet. And so that's through the fasting and the keto, but then pairing it with days of higher carb, really good foods where so you're nourishing the adrenal system, you're nourishing the thyroid, and you can still lose weight and get the benefits without slowing down your metabolism. And that seems to be this kind of sweet spot when it comes to the diets, depending on, of course, like if you've got insulin resistance, but you don't have adrenal problems, then something like carnivore keto for a little bit longer of a period of time, maybe a couple of months, could be really helpful. But if you've got hypothyroidism and you're not optimized on medication and adrenal dysfunction, which always goes hand in hand with hypothyroidism, you don't want to do any fasting and you don't want to do keto.
Yeah, I know it. It definitely the landscape gets more complicated depending on who the person is. And you're absolutely right. If someone is going full keto for an extended period of time and full fasting, we're talking about a 24-hour fast or anything, anything above 12 to 13, 14 hours consistently all the time, especially if you're still cycling.
Especially, yeah.
Especially that luteal phase, that second phase after ovulation, where we really need calorie expenditure, not only to boost progesterone levels, because that is so critical, and to get us, to the end of our cycle. And that's where it's all kind of, talking about losing that and ovulation. Women were fasting all the way through that luteal phase. We are tanking progesterone levels and we just we can't ovulate. And so no surprise that we're seeing that. And I think you're absolutely right. Like there's so much great research that shows, intermittent fasting, especially for insulin resistance, especially for cellular regeneration, cellular autophagy, can be great. But yeah, because these are fads and because of the number one thing being Googled right now, people are taking them to extremes. And they're, especially for us as women, they're just not serving us at an extreme level. And you're right, we have to be able to either work within the cycle, our menstrual cycle, if you're still cycling, and we have to mix it up. It can't be full tilt keto all the time, especially for women. So it's finding that sweet spot. And every woman's going to be a little bit different, and addressing the other issues that we're talking about here. Like if you have hypothyroid, is it autoimmune driven? Are your cortisol levels, is your stress response system completely tanked? What does that look like in regards to nourishing your body? All of those other players come into play as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And diet has so much to do too with whether or not your body can, even as we age, if you decide to do something like bioidentical hormone therapy, what you're putting in your body is going to really dictate how well you take on those hormones and if they're going to be healthy for your system or not. And so that's, I think, a big part of it too. And you have to be very careful about what you're feeding your system as far as that stuff goes.
So true. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, every woman's case by case. And I always recommend, kind of figuring out, what that root cause is. Is it the thyroid? What's upsetting the thyroid? Is it stress? Is it gut issues? Is it environmental toxins? Is it just low grade inflammation in the body that we've got to address out the gate? All these things have got to be in consideration. And the beautiful thing is they are levers that we can adjust with lifestyle. Thank goodness. Unless it is that you absolutely need to be supplemented with thyroid, then you've got to go and see a practitioner for that. And I do believe that a lot of this can be adjusted with food as well. It's just figuring out the right foods to feed the body.
Yeah, I always say you got to find your weight loss
Yes.
code, and that is going to look so different from person to person. And it's super important to stay just really open-minded. Like, try some of these things, try some of these dietary things that you're hearing about, see how your body feels on it. And if it doesn't feel good, be open-minded to continue on. And just remember that if you're following a low-carb keto diet or a carnivore diet, you really want to start incorporating some carbs back in, especially at certain times of the month. Like you said, like eat to your cycle. I always tell women that if they can really tune in to what their body's telling them, most women find it when they're cycling that it's much easier to do some fasting, intermittent fasting in the first half of their cycle, and they don't have the cravings. And that's for a reason. And the second half of your cycle, your cravings go up for a reason for carbohydrates. So, if you can eat to your cycle, that's awesome. So that you, in the first half of your cycle, you go a little bit more lower carb, you do a little more fasting. And then that second half of the month, put in a little bit more carbs. And you can also do this seasonally too, right? So that, you're eating more of those fruits and things like that come spring and summer, and then eating more of the root vegetables come wintertime. So it can be done monthly, it can be done seasonally, and it can be done weekly too. And I always say, if you're in the weekday, have the weekends where you're going higher carb, because it's a little bit easier to manage your weekends when you're being a little bit more relaxed with that kind of stuff. Maybe do some fasting in the week, but no more than a couple days. Like, you really don't want to overdo it. I was speaking with somebody the other day, and this has just been something that's been going on in my head. And I was talking to her about it because I think it was the girl that lost her period. And I was like, when you really think about it, if we didn't have the word fasting and intermittent fasting, and that wasn't around, or you go back 10 years, when we talked about fasting, we were usually talking about people in religious groups that would do fasting for religious reasons. But if somebody came to you and said, I eat one meal a day, I eat 500 calories a day, and it's one meal a day because I think it's good for me, what would we have labeled that 10 years ago? Anorexia. But because
Yes,
we say
starving
fasting,
oneself.
starvation, we would call
Yes,
that
starvation.
starvation. We would call it anorexia in a woman. If I had met a woman that ate one meal a day, I would be like, oh, she's obviously anorexic, right? But now we've put this
And no
label of,
surprise she lost her
and
period.
no surprise. Exactly. It's because women need to eat to stay fertile.
It's the most energy driven process in the body that happens every single month. Whether
Yeah.
you like it or not, whether you want it or not, your body is prepping and priming for a pregnancy, and it requires the most energy expenditure of men and females. I believe that the ovaries on average have like 15,000 mitochondria per cell.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm not saying that it's all bad. Like I said, I put fasting into all of my dietary plans for women because it does help you to reduce caloric intake for the week, and it will help you to lose weight if you don't overdo it. And so you have to find that
Like you
balance.
said, reducing inflammation and helping to stabilize
Yeah.
blood sugar issues. I think those are the two major things that I'm always so fascinated with is how do we reduce inflammation? How do we clean up the cells? How do we help create sensitivity and insulin so we don't have inflammation from that? And you're absolutely right. I think a little bit 100% serves.
Yeah.
It's when it's taken to the next level. And that's the thing. I feel like women, looking back at the time, you didn't feel stressed because you were just doing all the things that women do.
Yeah.
I was just doing I had a
Just
daughter.
doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I have a daughter. I'm running a company. I'm doing all these things, and that's just what everyone else is doing. So it's fine. You look back in hindsight, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I was burning the candle on both sides. And I always say that the one thing about women is, as long as you tell them, like you let them know what to do, they're gonna do it, and they're gonna do it to the umpteenth, level. It's just who we are. At least that's what I find to be true. And unfortunately, it's no surprise that we've got what I and you consider to be an extreme measure of like the fasting. And
Mhm.
that anything that's taken to extreme is going to ultimately, especially when we have hormones at play, it's going to ultimately be kind of devastating the system.
Yeah, I agree. The research shows that women that are in menopause, so they haven't had their period for over a year, definitely do better with a
Mhm.
lower carb diet, ketogenic, and fasting than fertile women do. So there is that, but regardless, you still want to be able to find that balance as soon as you can. You can use these diets as a therapeutic tool to help you reverse the insulin resistance and bring down that inflammation. But then, as soon as possible, you want to be bringing back in a lot of those good carbohydrates that are still, that promote lower inflammation, right? So I do lean always towards primal based diets for women going through menopause and perimenopause because of what it's doing to your blood sugar. It's easier to follow, and it can put you in a natural caloric deficit without suffering, right? Without feeling those hunger pains, because it's nutrient dense foods. You're eating those good fats. It's taking out a lot of the inflammatory foods.
Mhm.
And then you can go from there as far as, okay, how can I tweak this that's going to work for myself? And there's lots of different things there's so many awesome tools out there nowadays that can help women find their weight loss code, whether that's, getting your hormones tested. I have all of my clients and members all take their body temperature. Just their body temperature alone tells you a lot about their adrenal health. It can tell you a lot about your thyroid health, your metabolic health. And if it's consistently under, well, then okay, maybe it's worth then getting my cortisol tested, my DHEA, doing a thyroid panel, because your body temperature will reflect that if there's a problem in those areas a lot of the time. So you can do carb tolerance testing with blood sugar machines, so you can see, because some people can eat ice cream, for instance, and their blood sugar hardly even moves. But if that same person ate a bowl of white rice, their blood sugar could go through the roof, and then vice versa for somebody else. So you can do carb tolerance testing to say, okay, how does my body do when I eat beans, or when I have some whole grain rice, or brown rice or quinoa? What's my body doing? And then you can really start to narrow down, okay, actually this food doesn't work for me right now, this one does. And I know that that's not as appealing or sexy as do this for 30 days and you're going to lose 20 pounds, which is what we're being told with 95% of diets out there. But the sooner you come to terms with there is no quick fix, and the more you can really start to dig into, okay, what is my weight loss code? And just taking the time and having patience with yourself to try these different things to help you figure out what's going to work for your body.
Mm, I absolutely agree, Karen. I love your recommendations. I love that it's definitely not a one fix approach, the fast fix approach. There's no magic pill here.
No.
It really has so much to do about your personal body, what your personal body is going through, or what has happened in the past as well, and just kind of dialing that in and figuring that out. I think is the best advice that we can give women. I know it's not always the answer that people are looking for
No.
specifically. They're just like, just tell me to do the one thing and I'll do the one thing. And
Yeah.
what ultimately we're seeing is several years of women being told to do this one thing and it kind of backfiring on depending on what the circumstances are.
And I think too, like having your hormones tested can tell you so much as far as what the kind of dietary regime maybe you should be doing for a period of time. If you see that there's estrogen dominance and there's lots of inflammation, then you're going to know that you need to bring that down. If somebody's got an autoimmune condition, maybe they need to do an autoimmune paleo type thing for a while, or if they've got Hashimoto's. Like you can really tell a lot by looking. If you've got low cortisol, low thyroid, then no, you don't want to do the keto fasting right now until your body heals. You can tell a lot by where your hormones are.
It is so true. It is so true. And yeah, I mean, and we think about, like, let's say estrogen dominance is on the docket. We should be looking at the liver. We
Yeah.
should be looking at the gut. There's other areas that we should just be taking into consideration. Is why isn't the liver able to metabolize that much estrogen? What's the deal there? And so you're right. Once we get that beautiful kind of lay of the land, then we can start the approach. As
Yeah.
a woman who has Hashimoto's that's in remission and have had low thyroid issues, I've had low thyroid issues also due to chronic stress is ultimately what happened there, because I was just doing all the things that women were doing. I was on an autoimmune protocol for quite some time and it was huge, but it wasn't going to serve me the whole time, all the time. And
Yeah.
so it's really just a matter of really figuring that out, like you said, based on what's going on with you.
Yeah, I had a really high reverse T3 a couple years ago, and my T4 wasn't converting over to T3 properly. And I was on the wrong thyroid medication and I was getting sick from it. And I had to really look at, okay, why am I having this conversion issue? And that was part of finding my weight loss code at that time was, okay, why am I not converting my T4 to T3? And, my cortisol was too low. I had a gut problem. So I wasn't, there was that. There were so many these little factors. I had heavy metals in my body. So it was like, once again, looking to these number of different things to say, what's at the root of this hormonal imbalance. And I tried keto at that time, during that time, and it drove my T3 down. Within 1 month, my T3 dropped. And so it was like, oh, no, not, not a good
Not good.
idea. So yeah, I think you just got to be really open-minded to it.
Love it. Karen, honey, I love your take. I think you are right on the money when it comes to really figuring out what's going on with us, especially if we're still cycling. You're absolutely right. The same kind of findings I found for menopause as well is that
Oh
once
yeah.
all of that kind of clears out, again, still figuring out what's going to work for you. And I love that your recommendation around checking blood glucose levels, checking, what happens when you eat rice versus ice cream, and
Yeah.
understanding how's your body responding to that particular food, and even how is your body responding. What I love about a particular, like specifically a continuous glucose monitor, if one can get it, is
Hmm.
looking at exercise
Yes.
in how exercise affects your blood glucose levels, and how circumstances, you get in a fight with your partner or you get a crazy text message, like how does that respond? And all of these things we can measure so we can really, I think for me, I'm getting one put on once I have the baby, or yeah, once I have the baby, and they're not willing to put one on me just yet. And so I could get one on, but I'm just going to wait till the end of this pregnancy.
Yep.
And I'm really fascinated just to have that level of accountability, just to know. There's things that I know because intuitively I've been listening to my body for so long, but there's probably things I just don't. And, having something like that that can be measuring you consistently and looking at behaviors and seeing how your body responds, it's not just food that we're talking about here.
No. Yeah. Just sleep alone will
Yes. Oh
raise
my
your blood
gosh.
sugar
Yes, it will. You
if you're
wake
not
up.
sleeping.
Exactly. So, and I think this is also important to know. And you're just like, oh, that is a lever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought it was I needed to be on keto. No, I just need to sleep, And so,
So
it's
true.
really important to kind of look at all those levers as well. And I think that that kind of helps us to dial
It
things.
does. And then you can't lie to yourself.
No, you cannot.
Like when I looked at my hormones that first time and was like, oh, wow, I am so stressed out. Like, who knew? And so you can't lie to yourself about it. And then you're forced to do something. At least I always am. I'm like, oh, okay, I can't lie about this anymore. I actually have to sleep more, or I have to not eat that, or I have, and really pay attention to it. I like those little tools for testing. I think it can really help.
Absolutely agree. I love this. Karen, I just want to say thank you so much for not only painting your picture, but painting a real picture of what I think a lot of women are experiencing right now. My mom has tried keto and it
Oh,
wasn't working
everybody
for
has.
her. And I'm like, well, mama, and we look at her hormones and I'm like, these are the reasons why this isn't really working for you at the moment. These are the levers that we've got to pull for you. And until we have those numbers, and Oprah says, know your numbers. If you don't have those numbers, it's really hard for us to know what levers to pull. And so I think you're on the money with that. And the great thing about it is hormone testing can be done at home. You don't
Yes.
necessarily need to go to the doctor. We know sometimes, even if you do go to the doctor, they may not get you the testing that you want. Like reverse T3, not easy. Doctors
No.
don't always want to
You
order
can't
it.
even get it in
Yeah,
Canada.
they don't. Oh, you can't.
No,
Well,
not
there's
at
that.
all.
There's
Even
that.
doctors can't order it. Nobody. Only a naturopath can order it. And there's no lab in all of Canada that tests reverse T3.
Oh, goodness. Here in the US, we can, and we can
Yes.
do it self-test as well, but very rarely are you going to find a practitioner in the modern medical system that's going to be willing to run
Yeah.
that. You'll
Yeah.
have to go to a functional practitioner, or luckily in the US, there are at-home thyroid panels that you can run and they'll look at reverse T3. So just a heads up on that as we're having these conversations about
Yeah.
hormone tests and the importance of hormone tests. Goodness knows it's something I talk about all the time here on the show. Note that if there's a will, there's a way.
Yes.
And that more and more home tests are becoming available so that we can really take ownership and really take a look at what's going on.
Absolutely.
Now, Karen, where can we get more of you? Where are we sending people to check you out?
KarenMartel.com. I also have my own podcast, which I'm excited to have you on.
Yeah.
It's called The Other Side of Weight Loss. And I talk about all of the other things about weight loss that doesn't have to do too much with calorie counting and exercise. Well, a little bit about exercise, but definitely not calorie counting. But yeah, lots about hormones, psychology, spirituality, all of the things that I think are really important in helping you find your weight loss code.
Love it. Well, Karen, honey, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your brilliance and keeping it real. Love that so much. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for having me on.